On November the 1st, 2003, a crime took place that captured the attention of the entire United Kingdom. 14-year-old Charlene Downes was last seen walking around the Blackpool town centre before disappearing without a trace. Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to all of the friends and family of Charlene Downes. On the 1st of November 2003, Charlene had been out and about in the local area. In a few days' time, she had a meeting with her school to discuss her going back to class. According to her parents, apart from her not being in school, nothing was really out of the ordinary. During the afternoon, Charlene had met her sister, and they both went to play arcade games at a place called Coral Island. After this, they went to McDonald's and then went to see her mother, who was working around the corner advertising for a local Indian restaurant. Rebecca, Charlene's sister, then headed home. Karen, her mother, continued to work, but Charlene wanted to stay out a little longer and went to meet some friends. Karen Downes couldn't have known it at the time, but she had just said goodbye to her daughter for the very last time. According to her friends, at 9:30 they all went into town and visited a bar called the Carousel Bar, then headed back into the town center around 10:30. At 11 o'clock, the friends separated. Charlene was supposed to be making her way home, but like her mother just hours earlier, her friends would never see Charlene again. Charlene walked down the Abington Road into the night, her silhouette becoming ever more faint. She would vanish into that night without a trace. For some reason, though, her parents didn't seem as worried as you might think. It took them 2 days to phone the police and report her missing. Perhaps this was due to her recent behavior, and apparently it wasn't out of character for Charlene to not come home now and again. When she was 12, for example, she disappeared for 4 days. When she returned home, she said she had been staying with a friend, but just failed to tell anyone. On the flip side, the most vital time to find anyone that may have gone missing is in the first 24 hours, and that time had passed. Charlene was born on the 25th of March 1989, but in 1999 her parents decided to move the family to Blackpool, where they found a house on Buchanan Street, which is located just a few streets behind the beach promenade. This may sound nice, but the area is what you would call economically challenged, a sign of the sad times that exists in Blackpool today.
You've got the tourists that come in, you've got the lovely prom, and it's all bright and beautiful. What I see is that's the front stage, and then you've got the backstage 2 streets back, and you've got people that are struggling. You've got streets that are in poor condition. You've got derelict buildings, but you've also got people that can't feed themselves.
Charlene was described by all who knew her as a lovely person, fun to be around and having a great sense of humor. She did have her issues, though. Her behavior at school wasn't very good, and she was often being scolded for not doing what she was told. She was also known to skip school at times, which led to a strange punishment from her school. They suspended her, so her punishment for not going to school was being told that she wasn't allowed to go to school. The problem was that not being in school temporarily, she had little else to do with her time but walk the streets of Blackpool. Despite the family not having a lot of money, they were close-knit, the family life being described by social services as chaotic, though. Her parents loved Charlene and her siblings, and there was no question that they were always trying to do right by them. By the age of 13, Charlene had started to go off the rails. She had gotten in with a bad crowd in the area, and her behavior was getting worse, while she herself was becoming more distant. When Lancashire police received the phone call from the parents, they jumped into action right away. It didn't matter that this had happened before. A minor had gone missing on the streets, and she had to be found as soon as possible. They did, of course, start on the back foot. Now, it was approximately 48 hours since Charlene had last been home, and quite frankly, she could have gone just about anywhere or done anything, and anything could have happened to her by this point. Because 2 days has elapsed, the police went straight to the public, launching an urgent appeal for any information. Within hours, they were inundated with possible sightings. One person reported seeing Charlene sleeping rough on the streets. Another said that she had boarded a train. But most shocking of all, one person said they had seen her dead on the railway line. The police did chase down all of the potential sightings, but nothing came of any of them. After a few days, the case had hit a brick wall, and the trail, such as it had been, went cold. As is often the case in a story like this, certain vultures in the media will circle around looking to get any information they can. But if the story goes cold, they can be callous and simply ignore it. This is exactly what happened here. After a short period of time, despite Charlene not being found dead or alive, the media lost interest. Charlene didn't even warrant a small column in the newspaper, let alone the wall-to-wall coverage they would have preferred, as they had seen often with cases like this in the past. This angered Charlene's mother, who wanted to know why the media wasn't willing to cover the story. Charlene's mother did get an answer from a local newspaper, the Blackpool Gazette, but it wasn't the answer she was expecting. The paper told her that they had become aware of Charlene's disappearance, but the police had told them it was simply a young girl who had run away, and they didn't even entertain the possibility that something terrible could have happened to her. The police took this upon themselves without having any conversation with Charlene's family. Thankfully, the paper did agree to run the story, but by then, it could have been too late. So, it was the police themselves who had almost caused a media blackout by taking away any urgency from the situation. Blackpool, although not the tourist resort it once was still a very busy place. People come from all over to ride the roller coasters, walk the beach, go on the piers, and play in the arcades. It was entirely possible that someone could have come to Blackpool, taken her, and then left. And because of police complacency, nobody would have batted an eyelid. The police, for their part, did continue the investigation, and what they would discover would shock even them. They spoke to anyone who knew Charlene, including her friends. It was quickly discovered that not just Charlene's behavior, but that of her friends as well, was not just that of a group of unruly teenagers with too much time on their hands. It was discovered that many young girls in the Blackpool area, especially around the town center, had unwittingly become victims of grooming gangs. Charlene and her friends had been receiving alcohol, mobile phones, and cigarettes for sexual favors. Charlene, as we know, at the time was 13. Her friends were all around the same ages. In the UK, it is illegal to have relations with anyone under the age of 16 years old, meaning that in no way could any of these actions be called consensual. Police discovered that as many as 60 young girls had been targeted by the gangs, the youngest of them being just 11 years old. It was discovered that these girls had been targeted by the owners of various takeaway shops in the center of Blackpool. These girls had been targeted purposely. It is rare, very rare, that a young girl from a wealthy or middle-class background is targeted by these disgusting gangs. They pick out children who are from backgrounds with little money. These girls are groomed by these men because they buy them different things that they usually would not be able to afford. As police continued their investigation and interviews, it startled them how much these girls didn't understand what had been going on. None of them realized that they had been a victim of a crime, and in many cases they believed or had been told that they themselves were complicit in crimes because they had accepted the gifts and consented. None of which is true, by the way. It is a common tactic for these disgusting individuals who target vulnerable children in this way. The scale of grooming that had been going on was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Charities became involved in the case and discovered that over 800 convicted sex offenders who had been involved in this sort of crime all lived, in many cases still live, in the Blackpool area. This also led to accusations about the authorities, but more on that in a minute. The police, although making important discoveries about exploitation, had continued to treat Charlene's disappearance as a girl who had simply run away from home. Amazingly, it took them until 2006, roughly 3 years since Charlene had disappeared, to reclassify her case as a murder investigation. But they did make some progress. Police made 2 arrests. Ayad al-Batiki, who owned the Funny Boys takeaway in Blackpool, and Mohammed Ravishi, who was a business partner at the takeaway and also owned 42 other properties. Having been arrested, both men denied ever having met Charlene, but the police had not gone in without what they saw as damning evidence. They bugged both men's phones, cars, and places of work. The evidence the police gathered was shocking, and for some it may be difficult to hear.
Okay, you know where it needs to be. You're supposed to kindergarten road. You haven't had the machine before? You moved on. Everything. So you get food. Obviously they won't call something. Yes, the morning, I thought maybe something is on.
On a recording, Iod can be heard saying in a cheerful way that he had been guilty of grooming Charlene and having relations with her. But he also admitted on tape to killing her, then putting her body through a meat grinder in his takeaway restaurant and selling it as kebab meat. On another recording, he asked Ravishi, "How long do fingerprints last?" Ravishi responded by saying there's nothing left of her. She died. That's it. There is no evidence left. In May of 2017, both of the men went on trial at Preston Crown Court in northwest England. Both of them pled not guilty. The recordings were, of course, played in the courtroom. This evidence may be seen as damning, but it was lacking one thing: Charlene's name. Not once did either of the accused men mention her by name. The police had also gone to court with one vital piece of evidence known in law as habeas corpus. In medieval Latin, it means "you have the body." In other words, show me the body. This is an important part of the legal system, but it also makes a conviction very difficult if no body has been discovered in the case. The prosecution did have an ace to play, though. They found a witness who said they heard Iod specifically talking about Charlene, describing how she looked and her size, describing her as small. This implied that he did know her. Charlene had been small and very young-looking for someone who was 13 years of age. As if this wasn't enough evidence, at the same time as being on trial over Charlene's assumed death, Iod was also facing a sexual assault trial, completely unrelated to Charlene, although that was eventually dropped. Other young girls had come forward as part of the police investigation as well, identifying Iod and Ravishi for other acts of inappropriate behavior around young girls. Despite the evidence pointing squarely at these two individuals, when the jury returned their verdicts, they could not come to a conclusion. They were split down the middle, as some jurors believed there was some reasonable doubt surrounding their guilt, mainly because there wasn't a body. In the UK, if a jury is unable to come to a decision, this can cause a retrial with a fresh set of jurors. At first, this was in some doubt because of a lack of hard evidence. But later it was discovered that one of the jurors actually knew the two men. This is a big problem. If you have ever served on a jury, you will know that you are required to tell the court if you know the person or persons who are on trial. There is also further allegations that one of the defendant's brothers had been trying to intimidate jurors. A retrial date of 2008 was provisionally set, but there was a problem. Senior police officers within the Lancashire Constabulary, rather stupidly, decided that the evidence they had gathered through wiretaps might not be legal and actually objected to their own evidence. As a result of the police's own objections, the CPS had no choice but to cancel the retrial because without those wiretaps there wasn't any real evidence to get the two men convicted. To make the matter even more humiliating for authorities, both of these men were now found officially innocent, at least in the eyes of the law. But they had been dragged through the courts and accused of serious crime. And this kind of accusation sticks with people for the rest of their lives, regardless of what the courts may find. As a way of an apology, both men were paid £250,000 in compensation. Both men were, and still are, free to live their normal lives. The Downes family were naturally left devastated by the court proceedings and the fact that the men who they thought were guilty had gotten off. What was worse, these men hadn't actually been found innocent by evidence or by a jury of their peers. They had been found not guilty through a jury that couldn't reach a decision, while one of the jurors knew the accused men. The retrial had been effectively canceled by police who were supposed to be investigating the case in the first place. So is it any wonder that although we cannot condone these actions, two horrible events followed. Charlene's mother, just a month after the trial, got into an argument with her husband and stabbed him. The injuries were not serious and no charges were pressed, but Charlene's father put this down to the upset and frustration caused by the trial. Charlene's sister in 2009 was convicted of common assault against the brother of one of the two men. She didn't deny that she assaulted him and blamed him for threatening jurors involved in the trial. She was given community service. The police themselves, having prompted a media blackout, then assigning what were said to be untrained and inexperienced officers on the case who were presenting their evidence to court, hadn't even transcribed the statements properly. This prompted further anger from the family, who did not believe the police had taken the case seriously at all. They argued that had Charlene come from a wealthy family and maybe had gone missing on her way to piano lessons rather than being a troubled young girl from a family who didn't have a lot of money, the police would have acted more swiftly in trying to find her. Something else that came to light afterwards really highlights the inexperience of the officers on the case. A police informant who gathered a lot of evidence whilst wearing a wire was not given his brief properly. It is illegal in the UK to gather evidence by asking someone leading questions. They have to give up the information for themselves. David Cassidy, the informant, was not told this, so he asked many leading questions, which made the evidence, in part, inadmissible in court. As the result of the botched police investigation, 10 different officers were disciplined for their various roles in the fiasco. Sergeant Jan Besant was actually forced to resign because she had been responsible for transcribing the recordings, which it is said were totally inaccurate. However, she appealed the decision, and in 2014, it was proven that most of the transcripts had been inaccurate, and she was allowed to keep her job. One last arrest did take place in this case. A 51-year-old man who had moved to Preston from Blackpool was arrested for the murder of Charlene, but sadly, nothing came of it, and he was released 2 days later. Charlene's remains, wherever they are or were, have never been found. No trace of her was ever seen again. Her family had to endure the torture of the court case and listen to how authorities completely messed up their investigation into the missing, vulnerable young girl. Even to this day, the tragic disappearance of Charlene Downes has never been covered in the way that it should have been. Tragically, it looks like the Downes family will not receive any form of closure for what happened to Charlene. Closure, of course, won't bring her back, but at least they could try to move on and rebuild themselves as a family. We here at Beyond Evil hope and pray that the family can rebuild and try to live the best lives they can. Rest in peace, Charlene Downes. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.